Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader, and Heritage Auctions had some PSA 10 graded vintage Topps Star Wars cards that sold this past weekend, and I wanted to at least make you aware of some of these insane prices. If there was any worry that the trading card market was going to take a breather, these final sales prices prove that the demand is still there for Star Wars cards. And this thumbnail says it all. A PSA 10 Luke Skywalker Star Wars #1 from 1977 sold for $268,000 in an auction this past weekend. And so I've got that along with some others that sold, and then also some past sales data from Heritage, so you can just see how much and how ramped up the prices have become relative to even some of the past sales for the exact same card. It's pretty wild. So again, you know, this closed on October 24th. Gem Mint 10 PSA 10 Star Wars #1. So Luke in his Stormtrooper disguise, a pretty iconic card. And for a while there weren't that many that were great. I thought there was only like one or two that were graded 10, but there have been 4,000 copies submitted to PSA, and 9 have now been graded Gem Mint 10. So this is one of 9 that's PSA 10, and it was pretty nicely centered. That's one of the things you typically look for when you're looking at some of these Star Wars cards, is the borders from left to right. You know, at first blush, it looks like it's maybe very, very minimally off-centered left to right, but it's very hard to tell. It's very possible that this is pretty much perfect. I mean, looking at it even closer, it looks pretty good. I don't really see any centering issues on it. The back of the card is here, and you know, it was a gem. Don't get me wrong, but I was really shocked by this final sales price, and I couldn't remember what the last one sold for. In the back of my mind, it was like $50,000, but I did find this one, and this one sold in November of 2023, so about 2 years ago, and that sold for $78,000. That was also a Gem Mint 10, and in pretty similar condition from what I can see. I don't see anything major different with it, but I mean, look at that. That's a pretty incredible price difference in less than 2 years' time, going from $78,000 in November 2023 to today's sale at $268,400. All the prices include the buyer's premium from Heritage. But what a sale, and congrats to this, you know, to the submitter, the consigner, because they timed it pretty well, right? There hasn't been one in a while. And this consigner, I assume it's all the same consigner, they had all of the big cards in PSA 10 condition. And as a side note, this month, I think it starts, let's see here. This one goes live December 11th. So December 11th. And this is also a PSA 10 for Luke Skywalker, but this is the O-Pee-Chee version, the Canada, or the Topps Canada version. So O-Pee-Chee Gem Mint 10, and I would think that's even more rare than so there's only 2 of these in a PSA 10, the O-Pee-Chee Star Wars. Now, will it hit this number or anywhere close to this number? I don't think so. I would be really surprised if it does. It seems like the O-Pee-Chee PSA 10s for most of the vintage cards go for less, even though the population report is usually less. So I'm going to keep an eye on this one and just to see where it ends up selling. But that'll be very telling to see how this one compares versus the standard US card that sold for $268,400. But that one is coming up on Heritage if you have big money. That's a PSA 10 O-Pee-Chee version of Star Wars #1. Some other ones that sold, and not to be outdone here, I mean, some of these prices were just as incredible, admittedly on a smaller scale. So we had Star Wars #5, which is Princess Leia Organa in a Gem Mint 10. And that one was a beauty and sold for a little over $50,000. $50,000. And let's see. I was trying to find the population report on this one. Doesn't say it on here. Well, here we go. For view certification and population details. So we'll pull up the link here for Princess Leia Organa. Beautiful card though, and you can see that the PSA cert is running a little slow here, but what an awesome item. 50,020, and this one's closed the same day as the Luke. And so here's a nice high-res scan, and this is population 15, according to the PSA population report. So it's really cool that you can pull this information up for any card that you're looking at. I mean, I don't dabble in this type of market, but typically if it's a card that I've been looking at, wanting to buy, you pull up this PSA data. It's all free, and it allows you to kind of track what prices have done over time. And you can sort it by grade. So if you go to the PSA 10 for the grade, you can see what it's done. And relatively flat for the most part. And since that, 2020 or so, prices continue to go up. Now, the interesting thing is that for a lot of cards, price charts, it's like this with the exception of this last data point. It's all showing during COVID the massive run up in prices and then coming back down again. Well, that's what this did as well. There was a PSA 10 that sold in April 2024 for $7,700. There was one that sold in May 17th, 2024 for $5,600. And then we have another one that sold in May for $10,850. So even from May, and that was on eBay. It was a Gem Mint 10, May of 2025. So this year, let's call that about 5 months ago, 5.5 months ago, it sold for $10,850. That's looking like a really good investment, given that this one just sold for about 5x that number at $50,020. But just an interesting kind of data point. Obviously, this data point's not in there yet. And here was another, this is one that sold in November of 2023 for $10,500. So that's kind of in line with this sale in May of $10,850. It went for a little bit more than what this one went for in November of 2023 for $10,500. Here was a particularly good deal that, again, this one happened in November of 2023. In December of 2024, a Gem Mint 10 sold for $6,600. So again, it's not exactly apples to apples sometimes because you don't know what the centering is and all that. You have to kind of really do your research. At first blush, this one that sold in December it was a little bit off-centered right to left. It was a little overcut on the right-hand side of the card relative to the left-hand side. So you are going to get a discount when that happens, but that's a pretty significant discount of, let's call it 40%. And then now with this latest data point at $50,000, I still think that even though this might be slightly miscut left to right, this is looking like an absolute bargain relative to this most recent sale. Next up, we had Space Pirate Han Solo. This is Star Wars number 4 in a Gem Mint 10. That one sold for $47,580. I mean, just unbelievable numbers for a lot of these cards. And again, I didn't pull up the Go Collect data for a lot of them. They do have the PSA population report here on the bottom of it. I didn't see it before. In the listing, they actually do pull up the population report, which is nice to see. And so this one has 11 PSA 10s in existence. Grand Moff Tarkin, also not to be outdone. Skeletor, Grand Moff Tarkin's, that was a PSA 10 that was listed for or sold for $37,820. $37,820 on that one. And the population report on that one also, there's 11 of those. Ben Kenobi, I think we do have some old data on this one. So this one looked pretty well centered on this, and maybe left to right. It looks a little off-cut left to right, just slightly. That one sold for $24,400, and you compare that to the one that sold in that same November 2023 auction for $6,900. And you can see this one's maybe a little miscut right to left versus this one's left to right. It's a little bit more off-center the other direction for the one that just sold. But $24,400 versus $6,900 in November. Absolutely insane. And this one, there are, let's see if we've got the pop report on this one. doesn't say. Let's pull it up on the PSA population report here. But I mean, it just makes you realize what you always think that you're paying, like max dollars. And I'm sure the people that were buying this in November 2023 thinking, I'm never going to get my money out of this at $6,900. And then lo and behold, we get this one that sells at $2,400. And so the population report was 16, according to the PSA website. So 6,900 jumps all the way up to 24.4, or about 3.5 times your money in 2 years, less than 2 years. Harrison Ford is Han Solo. This is Star Wars number 58, a pretty iconic card. That one sold for $18,910. And the other data point from November of 2023, that was clearly kind of a special auction back in November 2023 with a lot of other Gem Mint 10s. And these were all different certification numbers, by the way. I did check to see if some of the same cards were resold, but at least the certification numbers from PSA were different for all of these sales. But this one sold for $7,500, again, versus $18,910, so about 2.5 times. Very similar price multiple versus the Obi-Wan Kenobi, but just insane difference. The R2-D2 Star Wars number 3, that one sold for $17,080. I didn't pull up the old data on that one, but that's got to be a world record as well at $17,000 for Star Wars number 3. We had Han in the Millennium Falcon in the gunner's seat. This is Star Wars number 30 in a Gem Mint 10. That one sold for $12,200. So really, I mean, all of these prices were really incredible. I mean, the Luke is on its own level, but and the Leia, I guess, and the first Han, but $12,200 for Amazing Robot C-3PO. This is Star Wars number 66. And then we had Who Will Win the Final Star War? Gem Mint 10 Star Wars number 52. That one sold for $427, very much within, kind of a budget that most of us could live with. This one was off-centered a little bit left to right. As you can see, it's a little bit heavier cut on the right-hand side. But, PSA has come out and said that even if it's 60-40, you can still oftentimes get that Gem Mint 10 grade. Luke and Ben on Tatooine. This is, I guess, Series 2. And this one sold for $7,625. Here was an interesting set that sold. So this one had pretty much all of the main cards, and these were all PSA 9s. So most of us would kind of max out at a PSA 9 in terms of our budget. And this would be like an instant collection for somebody. But it also did include the Luke Skywalker, where the vast majority of this value is for this auction lot. But this auction lot sold for $15,250 on October 24th. So kind of an instant collection for somebody, all PSA 9s. I mean, whoever submitted all these just had some incredible items. So anyway, take that for what you will, but the vintage, the vintage tops, I keep saying Kenner, the vintage top Star Wars market, PSA graded in high grade, low pop cards like this, there's clearly very strong demand right now. And I would just be curious to see where this particular card goes from here for the next time that we see the U.S. version of the Star Wars number 1, Luke Skywalker, and whether this $400 number will look like a bargain down the line, or if it will look like a massive overpay. And I mean, if I had to hold my feet to the fire here, I think it's going to be, personally, I think it's going to be very similar to what happened with the rocket firing Boba Fett's. We saw some really big peak prices for rocket firing Fetts that jumped up, and someone listed it at the perfect time, and they got whatever it was, 200,000 plus for it. And then somebody tried to list one later, and they got like less than half, or about half that price. So, now that there's 9 of them on the population report in a Gem Mint 10, I would wager that somebody else is going to try to submit another one to Heritage to get a similar price point, and will be disappointed. But that's my guess. Who knows? Maybe they wait and kind of give the market time to digest such a big item before they try to list it again. But wow, what an awesome sale at $268,000 for Star Wars number 1. And that's all I really had for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.